in the cold, cold ground before I recognized the term UAP. I used to love to speculate on the possibilities of UFOs, the things they're capable of and the things they'd seen. Probably Flight of the Navigator was what stoked the imagination fires the most for me. That movie is pure magic, and if you didn't watch it as a kid, you have to watch it as an adult. On shrooms or acid, but not peyote, as that one seems a little bit on the more ceremonial side of things. The movie, in a nutshell, is a boy goes looking for his dog or something in the woods at night when he stumbles across a vehicle purely for the exploration of the cosmos. On board is a small zoo with the coolest animals the previous pilot had come across. And I don't think that they allude to what happened to the previous pilot at all. Like, this boy just stumbles across an empty ship. Beyond that, I can't remember much besides it's worth the watch, and you should check it out. United States Congress has just recently, for the second or third time, confirmed the existence of UFOs. And as of the day I'm recording this, we were supposed to be one full day into an alien invasion. In 2009, a computer scientist by the name of Cliff High makes a prediction of an alien invasion. He said that there would be a trigger for this event, and that would be President-elect Donald Trump being interviewed by Joe Rogan. Trump hadn't expressed interest in running for POTUS at this point, and Joe Rogan didn't have his podcast. Those elements on their own make this a substantially more weighty prediction. Being a computer scientist, this guy was able to put together an algorithm that did an amalgamation of all the information available at the time and produced a result. The algorithm model said that 39 days after this interview, there would be an alien invasion. As of yet, all quiet on the Western Front, but there has been a distinct uptick in UFO sightings recently. And some months ago, the James Webb Telescope apparently was keeping track of these objects deep in space. I guess they assumed they were asteroids that were like on a very close course, like that would put it really close to Earth. And then something happened that caused these objects to deviate a little bit away from Earth. And then there was a course correction that put it directly back on path for Earth. The unlikeliness of this observation being made, along with all the hype going on for UFOs in Congress and stuff lately, makes this announcement a little sus. But anyways, on with the show. I've been lucky enough to see more than several UFOs/UAP throughout my years on this anomalous rock we call the planet. The first one was the least interesting, so we'll start there. It's 2001, probably mid-spring. I'm in the throes of adolescence, and something probably trivial has put me in a sour mood, a most sour mood. The only thing for it is to go for a walk in the sprawling metropolis that is Prince Rupert. My angst compels me to sit alone in the bleachers at Roosevelt Field. I throw my gaze skyward after sitting. The stars are shining brightly. Probably it was a clear sky and colder than a witch's teat if so. Before long, my eyes begin to adjust to the level of light, and I think I can see movement between the stars. It was a half a minute or so before I was certain that what I was looking at was indeed a point of light moving around up there. It was a squiggly path it cut. No straight lines at any point. It never increased in brightness or visibility, never got any bigger from what I could see. I'd been wanting to see a UFO for like more than half my life at that point, and I was no doubt pleased as punch to finally be seeing one. But the distance and the not being able to see anything besides a dot of light made the experience bittersweet. My next sighting was 2 or 3 years later, when me and a buddy were on a weed run. We're walking up McKay Street when one or both of us happened to be looking up at just the right time. It was an overcast day, and on the other side of the cloud cover, something immense and or powerful lit up the overcast twice. There was 2 flashes. I can't remember what order, but one flash was green and the other one was almost lightning white, but not quite. There was no sound accompanying these flashes. My next sighting wouldn't be for another several years. Another buddy and I were on a cruise about town that brought us to the highway and then to the road to Ridley Island. The stars were shining powerfully that night, and there wasn't much clouds, if any. After some time, in the distance up in the sky, we could see a small, distant flash, like every 8 seconds or so. With each flash, it's progressing almost entirely in our direction. When it was almost directly overhead, we still could see nothing in regards to what was producing the light. The light itself seemed to be a column or pillar when it was produced. It extended away from the source only a short distance before dissipating. Each flash would last a fraction of a second. It would be yet another several years before my next sighting. I was sitting in my front yard, having a smoke and occasionally gazing skyward at the mostly, if not entirely, clear sky. After a minute or two, I see a rather bright satellite traveling through the sky, and something in me said to keep track of its trajectory. In a moment, I would be very glad that I did, because it was very gradually turning right. Not that far into the curve, something amazing happened that I'm super grateful to have witnessed. A stunningly cerulean blue meteorite traveling in the, at that moment, complete opposite direction from the UFO burst upon the scene. It was only lit up for a half a second or so, but it was spectacular. And blue is my favorite color, so I felt exceptionally lucky that night. The way the meteorite shot past the UFO in the direction opposite it was going at that moment really gave the impression that it was a projectile fired at this course-correcting anomaly. A few years later would see my next sighting. A buddy was dropping me off at home after some catching up, and we were talking a bit more before parting ways. After several minutes, I see a shadow at the bottom right quadrant of the moon. First, I thought it was just a cloud, but after less than 10 seconds, its leftward progress would have it in front of the moon enough that it was clearly a circular silhouette. It was at the very most a 20th the size of the moon, and it was around a third of the moon's width away from the bottom. It took a dozen or so seconds for this thing to travel perfectly horizontally across the face of the moon. We both commented on how trippy it was to see after smoking so much weed. There's 3, possibly 4 more sightings I can share, but they're the least flashy of the sightings, so maybe some other time. Now, on to the meat and potatoes of the episode. The most interesting stories I have are the ones where I got the best look at the craft. The first one was not long after COVID started up. I was working a job, and it didn't necessarily excuse one's excessive drinking, but it did make it more understandable. On a fine sunny afternoon at Prince Rupert's waterfront, I was enjoying the drink, and I arrived at home, much to my surprise, not long after. I got there in time to find my father in the front yard doing some chores or something. After a brief confab, one of us happened to look up as a completely silent craft was making its way directly overhead, traveling perpendicular to the mountain and the harbor. It definitely wasn't the most exotic UFO anyone has ever saw, but it was still incredible. It was either pentagonal or hexagonal, but I'm leaning toward the pentagonal, and it wasn't an egg-smooth type shape, but seemed to be very angular with discernible features. It didn't have that single piece of metal look to it, but instead had a more assembled appearance. Not to say that it looked like anything we would produce. In the center of the craft was a powerful source of light that was not at all toned down by the still bright sky behind it. It cycled between white, orange, and brown, and that made it a little extra wow for me because I'd never seen a brown light before, much less one that powerful. I can't remember anything that me and my dad said on the matter, only that we were both shocked by what we just witnessed. It was a year and a few months later that I would have my most remarkable sighting of a UFO. My beloved baby bear of a dog, Nacho, and I were on a walk. He had been cooped up for at least a couple of days and was getting very restless, so we went on a rare evening time walk. The sun hadn't set all that long before we made it to Service Park. There was still a hint of daylight to the partly cloudy sky, and it was beautiful. Unfortunately, it was around the start of the year, so it was still cold as fuck. But I didn't let that stop us from going and having a decently sized walk. I'm very glad that I didn't let it get in the way of a good walk, because a bit after we turned onto Prince Rupert's most charming avenue, 4th, my eye was drawn skyward. I had to blink furiously as I had been gaming on Brawl Stars for most of the day, but eventually I could see that it was indeed no regular sight seen in the skies above Prince Rupert, BC, Canada. I wished so hard that I hadn't blurred out my vision that day, because I could tell that this craft was a feast for the eyes, a lot going on it. I only clearly remember the side profile of the craft, and that it resembled the shape of a dropship from Microsoft's Halo game. Not the goofy Y-shaped ones, but the more streamlined ones with like the gun on front. Instead of a gun, there was a spotlight. And instead of near the front of the craft, it was directly beneath the very front of the craft. The light wasn't otherworldly bright or anything, but it was slightly more powerful than the LED headlights that blind you at night on the highway nowadays. I briefly considered starting to run so as to minimize the amount of time my view of it would be blocked by the houses, but then I remembered how long Nacho had been waiting for this walk, so I decided that meant more to me than seeing more of this extraordinary sight. We made it to a pathway that connects 4th Avenue to the avenue below 3rd, and I couldn't pass up on the chance to walk through the cliff's edge to see if there was anything more to see. Despite the frigid wind and my irresistible urge to be done with the walk as soon as possible, I stood at that cliff's edge very glad with my decision. The UFO was still in view. It had flown across the harbor and was to the left of Mount Morse, the big mountain across the harbor. It was a very brief second viewing of this craft, but it was good enough. How long it took us to get there, I was certain it would be long gone. The spotlight on front was strobing for some reason. Not give you a seizure fast or anything, but like a steady on and off, like a dad flicking a light switch trying to get his kids out of bed for school. It moved behind the smaller mountain, and I stuck around for less than 10 seconds before deciding to call it a day on that walk. It was a week or so later that I was on that same route walking Nacho again, when we were passing by that connector between 4th and 3rd, when an orange helicopter flew between us and where we saw the UFO. I have no idea what kind of helicopter it was, but I know it wasn't one of those tiny ones that are stereotypical, like of a legacy news outlet to use. This was a decently beefy chopper. The memory of the UFO was still fresh enough in my mind that the size comparison was done automatically. I didn't have to conjure anything up, it was ready to go. The UFO was like 4 to 5 times the size of the heli. I can't remember if I thought of this comparison before or after the second walk, but I guesstimated that it was the size of 2 or 3 houses that go for $1 million in Vancouver nowadays. This revelation stirred up some of that same wonder I felt while viewing it the week prior. And that does it for this week's episode of D'seh Wezz. I'm D-Rock, and I thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and I hope that you'll be coming back to join me again next week.